Hi, in this video we will take a look at how to bring data from Rhino to Blender. There are a few ways to do it and a couple of things to think about. Okay, here we go. Okay, here we are in Rhino 7 and we have this sample object here. Just a simple thing with some rounded edges. And currently all these surfaces are separated. So this is not a solid at this moment. So there are two ways to consider, two options to consider when exporting for Blender and using the OBJ format. You can export open objects or solid objects. In some cases, it's okay to just, if you want to be quick about it, and just export an object that actually has all of its surfaces separated, although it will appear as one object in Blender. Now, in some cases, you want the object to be an actual solid. Okay, so let's take a look at how to do this. So first of all, okay, we have this object here where all of these surfaces are separated. And we can choose all of them and go into the export selected. Okay, we have the OBJ format here selected. And let's call this example open. And let's click on the export button. And now we get this window here. Let's take a look at what we have here. Geometry. Okay, we want to use polygons, so let's keep this as it is. Formatting. Not much here. We don't need to change anything here. If your material definitions is checked, you can uncheck that. Naming, well, we only have one object, so we're not going to get too confused. If you have more objects in your export, then you should maybe change these. Use layers, use names from layers, for example. But we want to really take a look at this mesh tab here. Now we are exporting an open mesh. So we want the vertex welding to be like this, unmodified. Sub D is unchecked, n-gons none. Now, down here, I usually uncheck the texture coordinates because we don't really need to bring any materials with us from Rhino. You are probably exporting your data to Blender because you want to use Blender for animating or just rendering the data. So you will be making all the materials and everything in Blender anyway, so there's no need to bring any materials from Rhino. So let's uncheck the texture coordinates, and in the formatting pane here, let's uncheck the export material definitions. Okay, let's go back to the mesh tab. And okay, vertex normals, that's okay. Vertex colors unchecked. And now it is very important that export open meshes is checked. Now that we're doing the open export with the separated surfaces. Okay, this should be okay. So let's just click OK. And we get another window. What is this all about? Well, polygon mesh options. So this lets us control the accuracy, the density. Let's take a look at this preview here. Let's click on the preview here. Okay, that gives us a preview of how Rhino is going to break the NURBS surfaces to polygons. That looks pretty good for me, and if you use these kinds of settings, density 0 and the maximum distance edge to surface 0.01, and that should give you this kind of a nice result. Okay, we're happy with this. Let's go ahead and click OK. And Rhino has exported it. Okay, now it is time for our second export, which will be the solid version of this object. So let's first make a solid out of this. Let's choose, select all the surfaces like that, and go to the solid menu here. And down here we have create solid. Let's click on that. Great. Rhino has now created one solid. Sometimes this doesn't work. If you have a very complex object, it might not work. In those cases, you may be just fine with exporting an open mesh to Blender. Especially if your material is non-transparent, or if you're not showing edges in great detail, if you're not really zooming in on the edges, then you're probably just fine with an open mesh. In some cases, it's better to make sure that you are exporting a real solid, which we have now. So let's go here, export selected, and let's name this example solid. Okay. Export, and oh, okay, let's just replace ours here. We had one there already. And nothing, we don't really need to change anything here or here. Rather, in the mesh tab, we want to change a couple of things. Now, this is a solid object, so all the vertices should be welded, but I've noticed that it is still best to choose this option here, the welded option. Let's do that. And down here, I'm just going to uncheck the export open meshes. This is to make sure that we are actually working with solids. If this is unchecked, Rhino will refuse to export anything that is not a solid. So it's kind of a fail-safe, just so that you don't accidentally export something that is not a solid. Okay, let's try these. So welded, and we have unchecked the open meshes export here. Okay, let's click on OK. And let's now, in this polygon mesh options window, let's click on the preview again. That looks fine. You can, of course, play around with all of these numbers here if you want more resolution, so to say. But we're just going to go ahead with these again and click OK. Okay, we have successfully exported the object. Great. Let's take a quick look at the basics of importing things to Blender. Let's go to the File menu, and here you will find Import. And in this menu, there are multiple formats that you can bring to Blender. We are going to use the Wavefront OBJ, but you could also use STL. If for some reason you don't see OBJ in your list, there's a way to fix it. Go to the Edit menu here and Preferences. And here, let's highlight the Add-ons tab. And in the search field here, let's type in OBJ. Okay, if this import-export wavefront OBJ format, if this is not checked, you should check it, and that will solve the problem. Now we are ready to import our first file into Blender. Let's choose the one called example open, and let's import it. Okay, here we have it. Now, the first thing I like to do is just to get rid of the default material and create a new material for it. You can, of course, use your own ones. Now, let's take a closer look at it by going into the edit mode. Okay, let's just click somewhere and unselect all the vertices. And since this is the open version, let's just make sure how the edges are behaving. So let's select one of the edges. I'm just going to press G to move this edge. Okay. I'm going to select the other one too and press G again and just move it. Okay, so what you see here is an open mesh. It is visually solid, but actually all these edges are non-welded, I guess. Now, this was expected. This is expected behavior from what we exported from Rhino. In some cases, this is fine. In some cases, you don't need to use solids. So there can be a use case for this too. Let's take a look at our second version, the solid version. I'm just going to select this example solid here and click import. Okay, here we have it. Now you can, of course, get rid of the default material again if you want to. That's up to you. Let's take a closer look at this object. If we hit the tab key on the keyboard, we can enter the edit mode. And what do we have here? Okay, let's just click somewhere to deselect everything. Okay, let's check some of the edges. So I'm just going to select this edge here and press G and move. Okay, see what happens. Both sides of the edge move at the same time. This means we have a solid. This means our object is solid. That's great news. I'm just going to hit escape. Okay, so this was a success. By the way, these light blue colored edges mean that they are treated as sharp by Blender. So Blender adds this automatically when you import a solid object. That's pretty cool. Good. That's how it works. So now you've seen how to export an open mesh and how to bring it into Blender and how it looks like in Blender. And also you've now seen how to export a solid object from Rhino and how to check in Blender if it is actually a solid.